In this lab, we're going to show you how to create Node-RED flows that create or use HTML web pages. You should already have language translator connected to your Node-RED application. And in this lab, we're going to use HTTP, HTML web pages, browser-side JavaScript, AJAX consumer REST APIs, as well as the Watson language identification service. So we'll create a new tab, and we'll give it a name, because we've got multiple tabs now, so we need to be able to identify what's on what tab. And we'll grab HTTP nodes, an HTTP input node and an HTTP response node. And we need a template, and the template is where we put our HTML. We'll wire the nodes together. So the template, we'll actually put in some HTML that we want to output. And it's in the PDF document from instruction 9. We'll paste it into our edit template node. Click done. One more change to make, and that's in the HTTP input. We actually have to specify the URL. And it can be anything you want with the leading slash. We'll give this HTTP input a name, because we're going to have several eventually. We need to be able to distinguish between them. So now we're ready to deploy. Our flow has been deployed. The URL is the base of your Node-RED flow with /hw, and here's the Hello World web page. Unfortunately, because we're copying from a PDF, the end of lines are not being preserved. Anyway, we'll get rid of that because we're now ready to add some JavaScript into the template. Grab that and we'll paste that into template node. So the previous one was just raw HTML. The web page is fairly simple. The body is still a hello world. But this time we're looking for a name. And we have a form on the HTML page asking for the name with a submit button. We make use of jQuery, the JavaScript library. One document ready. We hide the greeting. We create an event listener for the submit button for the form. When you do click submit, your text is identified and used in the greeting. The enter button just allows you to enter to invoke the submit. So we're ready to deploy. Refresh our page. It's prompting for a name. We'll enter a name. And there we are. There's the greeting. So now we have a HTML web page from Node-RED in which we have some JavaScript being executed. Browser-side JavaScript. Next stage is to actually get the JavaScript to invoke an AJAX call. A REST API. So grab the next bit of template code. Unfortunately, new lines aren't going to be preserved, which makes it a bit awkward to edit. Again, looks very similar. This time it's looking for text that you type in, and it's going to process that. It's going to output what it thinks the language is. Again, we use jQuery. Setup page looks very similar to before. And this our invoke AJAX call. So we're going to send a post to the URL lang identify. And the submit button and the enter button. Processing as before. Click done. Deploy that. And now we have to create the REST API that JavaScript invokes. So we grab another HTTP input node, another HTTP response node, and this time we'll also take a function node. So wire them together. So this is going to be our post for our lang identify REST API. I'll edit the function node and enter the simple function that sets the payload into an object structure and payload identify response to I do not know. So this will be sending JSON back to the client. Deploy our changes and try the application out again. And there we are. This is our initial response because it doesn't know what language they're tapping in because the language identification functionality isn't in there. That's what we're going to add in next. So grab another function node, the language identification node, wire the nodes together. So the processing just before we call the language identification, this will extract the data from the REST input and make it available as the payload for the language identification node. Because if we have a look, it's expecting the input on payload and it will output on message.lang. So for processing the output from the language identification function, take this piece of functionality and add it in. This just detects that a language has been identified and then sets that as a response in payload identify response, which is what our client is expecting. Click on done. We can actually also add in a debug node. To actually show you the output from the language identification. So set that to message.lang. And of course we've got an extra function node, so we'll just give it a name and again so that we can distinguish it from the crowd. Now try our application. So it's now able to detect language, and on the debug we can see the output and the confidence level. We'll try something else out and the application is now running. So now you know how to create web pages in Node-RED, how to add in JavaScript functionality, and how to invoke REST APIs.